Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading down into the basement for a truly chilling collection of scary stories. Don't forget, if you'd like your birthday shout out or just to support me and show a little love, feel free to check out my Patreon page for some exclusive perks, link in the description. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This experience happened last night, when I had to go check on our rental property an hour away. My wife got a notification at around 10 p.m. that there was movement detected from the cameras we had set up in the rental property to keep an eye on the place until we can get it rented. My wife asked if I could go over there to make sure everything was okay and locked up. I told her to text me if any more notifications came through. I pull up around 11:30 and can see there's a light coming from the basement. Already on edge, I walk around the outside and check windows and doors. All are shut and locked. My wife called me and asked if I had gone inside yet, because she got another movement detected in one of the bedrooms. I told her I was just unlocking the door and to go check inside, but really didn't want to. Maybe the camera detected me outside the window. I just said this is to make myself feel better. I open the door and yell out, "Is anyone in here?" I already called the police and they'll be arriving shortly. I listened for anyone moving around but didn't hear anything. I check all the rooms and find nothing, so I head down to the basement to at least turn off the light. I walk into the basement and see the cord for the light swinging. But only that light. There's no air movement. I do a quick search and check for anyone hiding before I turn the light on my phone and pull the cord. The moment it turns off, I heard a loud bang upstairs. I ran up the stairs to get out of the basement quickly. The basement stairs are right next to the front door. I go out the door and start shutting it. I hear a voice come from the basement.
"I don't like the dark. Please stay."
I hopped back in my vehicle and turned it on and pulled out the driveway, and I see the basement turn back on. I called my wife and told her that I was on my way home. She said she got another movement detected alert right as I called her. Maximum nope. So there I was at 21 years old, upright and breathing, not drunk, not high, and not sleep deprived. I'm not the type to go chasing ghosts or shadows. I don't believe in any of that nonsense. But then it happened. At roughly 11 p.m. 2 years back, night had already curled up around the window. I'd gone downstairs to pee, and the basement was unremarkable. Post to the right, wall to the left, couch in the middle. To get to the washroom, you had to loop behind the couch, and halfway through the journey, something in my brain went ping. That subtle instinct, the one that doesn't speak in words, but still gets its point across. Turn around now. And against all logic I obeyed, and I saw it. A figure, human-shaped, made entirely of light. Not glowing, not blazing, not radiant like some celestial being come to grant me the secrets of the universe. This thing was calm and pale, soft as fog, but dense enough that I couldn't see through it. It stood there behind the couch, silently waiting, watching me. And it shouldn't have been there. We looked into each other for a few seconds, but I didn't panic. My heart didn't leap into my throat, and there was no rush of terror. Just astonishment. And then it ran. It sprinted behind the post like someone who had absolutely not intended to be caught, whatever it was doing. And as soon as it passed the post, it was gone. That's when the feeling hit me. That ice cold, what the hell was that crawls up your spine when your brain finally catches up with your eyes. I hadn't been dreaming. I hadn't been drunk. The house was new, No previous owners, no lingering tragedy soaked into the drywall, no dead relatives, no anything. It wasn't until it vanished that I realized how heavy the air had become. It didn't look scary. No face, no claws, no Lovecraftian writhing. Just a figure made of light. And as soon as I saw it, it startled and fled. And now I wonder, what it saw in me? What made it pause and stare before bolting? The thing that makes this so scary isn't the thing itself, but the questions it leaves you once it disappears, about the nature of reality, life after death, and much more. And I wish I had some answers for all the questions it left me so abruptly. 2 months ago, I moved into an old house with 4 roommates, who I've been friends with for 6 years. We don't know the year that the house was built, but it has milk doors for the milkman to drop milk off at the house when it was socially unacceptable for a housewife to interact with another man, aka the milkman. So we estimate that the house was built somewhere between 1920 and 1950, but it might be earlier. 2 days ago, I asked one of my roommates to send me the floor plan of the house. I noticed that there was a 17 square meter storage room in the basement, and that the only door to the storage room was through the boiler room. I had never been in the boiler room, only peeked inside, so I decided to check out this storage room. When I walked in, it was really dark, so I left to grab a flashlight. Unfortunately, the only flashlight I have is a dual flashlight laser pointer for my cats, so the flashlight was very small in diameter and quite dim. But I could tell the floors were made of concrete that was very eroded, and the walls were also made of some kind of rock material, either concrete or large bricks. The room itself was completely empty, and there were no lights and windows. When I shined the light at the furthest wall about 5 meters away from where I was standing, I saw some wooden art thing hanging on the wall. I can't remember quite what it looked like, but I believed it was square-shaped, containing some geometric pattern, and I vaguely remember something unique, like a figure or larger symbol, to be somewhat in the center of this art-like thing, or maybe slightly higher than the center. At this point I was somewhat freaked out, so I immediately decided to leave, and when I stepped through the doorframe into the boiler room, I stepped in a puddle. I was somewhat confused, because it would have been very difficult to miss before. I had walked through that area 3 times already, but the leak seemed to be coming from the hot water heater, so I decided it was normal, and went to bed. Then last night when I was sleeping, I heard a bubbling sound coming from the toilet in the bathroom that is right next to my bedroom, which is the only bedroom in the basement. I got out of bed to check it out and saw this large bubbling, forming and popping over and over again for about 3 minutes. I stood there and observed it, not knowing what to do, and when it finally stopped, I returned to bed. The house is old, so I assumed the bubbling in the toilet might have been a quirk of the house that I was experiencing for the first time, or maybe a blocked pipe. We've informed the landlord to check it out. This morning I messaged my roommates and told them I wanted to show them something in the evening, the storage room, but told them I wanted it to be a surprise so they could be as shocked as I was. Due to Thanksgiving weekend, as I live in Canada, only one roommate was going to be home, Rebecca. She texted me to ask what I wanted to show them and if it was a secret room. And after I said yes, Rebecca shared that Danny, another roommate, had recently had a dream about finding a secret room in our house. Rebecca also asked if the secret room was in the boiler room. I said it was, and she told me that Danny and Macy, a third roommate, had tried opening the door on 3 separate occasions in combination with each other, and they had never been able to open it. They assumed it was locked because the door handle didn't turn, and they didn't care enough to ask the landlord for a key. I didn't expect the doorknob on the inside of the storage room when I was there briefly, but it has a keyhole on the side of the boiler room. I asked the landlord for the key to the storage room, but they said that they'd never had a key or been in that room, as they are the new owners of the home. I FaceTimed Rebecca and asked her to try opening the storage room because I wasn't home yet. When she tried, the doorknob wouldn't turn. She also tried pushing and pulling, but the doorknob wouldn't budge at all. Rebecca had to leave to go to her family for Thanksgiving, so when I got home a few hours later, I tried going into the room. The puddle in front of the door was no longer there, but there was a puddle still under the hot water heater, not just right in front of the door to the storage area. So I'm assuming that the water in front of the door dried over the past few days. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get the door to open. The handle wouldn't turn and the door wouldn't budge, even when I pushed or pulled as hard as I could. I did not purposefully lock the door when I closed it 2 nights ago, and the first time I opened the door it was so easy to open, I didn't even consider the door could be locked. And I know this is a very, very minor thing, and it might be unrelated, but 3 weeks ago I accidentally spilled some liquid on the egg carton in the fridge. The carton was saturated with liquid. I assumed eventually it would dry, but I quickly realized I'd be wrong about that. I decided to just leave it, and today when I opened the fridge, the carton was bone dry. I open my fridge every day, and I strongly believe I would have noticed if the egg carton started to dry after 3 weeks. With the water in the front of the door drying, I can chalk it up to natural drying, but with the egg carton, I can also see how that may have been the natural drying process, but I do find it quite strange that for 3 weeks the carton remained soaked and now is bone dry. With the toilet bubbling, I can say it's likely due to a blocked pipe or a quirk of the house. But why was I the only one able to open the door? And why can't it be opened now? I suppose I could have accidentally locked the door on my way out, but my roommates insist they tried very hard to open it before I even knew about it. I've known these people for 6 years, and they aren't the kind of people to play pranks on others. I've never heard of them playing a prank on anyone, and they've never played a prank on me for the 6 years I've known them. I can't come up with a reasonable explanation for why I was able to open a door, and my roommates who tried on 3 separate occasions insisted it was locked, and any insight into the other strange events would be greatly appreciated. I am sharing this because I'm in search of potential aid. I live in an above-ground basement in a 3-story townhouse. For some context, I'm a very light sleeper and will pretty much wake up at almost any disturbance. To help alleviate this, I typically play some sort of white noise, whether it be artificial or something like a fan to help drown out any odd bumps in the night while I'm sleeping. I've been living in this place for over a year now, and aside from the occasional sounds from my roommates waking up early or an odd nightmare, I have generally slept here without any issue. That was until last night at least. I had gone to bed around midnight, which is typical of me since I'm a night owl at heart. I was sleeping soundly, when suddenly I was awoken by something. I began to sit up in my sleepy state to try to more clearly understand the sound that I had just heard, when it repeated itself a second time. It was an incoherent whisper that I heard clear as day, coming just a mere 4 feet from my left from the closed window. I started to immediately feel panicked, but thinking maybe I was just in a weird state of half asleep. So I tried my best to wake myself up more, stay attentive, and listened if the sound occurred more. I heard it again 3 more times, in the exact same cadence, volume, and location. Now I was truly freaked out because I knew I was fully awake. My mind went into panic mode as I quickly got a makeshift weapon and some pepper spray as my mind tossed around the ideas of potential intruders or perhaps some sort of spirit, which, mind you, my encounters with the supernatural have been minimal at best. I've never witnessed anything to this level in my life. Now you may be thinking, if you hear a voice coming from your window, then wouldn't it make sense for it to be someone outside? I would wholeheartedly agree, except that this whisper did not at all have the sound of being muffled by someone trying to talk through a window. It sounded clear and airy, as if someone were right next to my window, talking at me from inside my room. Disturbed, tired, and feeling exposed, I decided to head up to the main level of the house to keep watch and be out of potential reach for whatever was scoping out or was in the basement. I waited in complete silence for about 40 minutes. Just starting to subtly convince myself that maybe it was all just a ruse or a trick of the mind, when a set of repetitive, intentional knocks came at one of the glass windows. It knocked 6 times, a light knock that wasn't rhythmic in the slightest. This was the last of the activities I encountered. Not too long after this, one of my roommates came downstairs for a late-night drink of water, and we ended up searching through the property, both inside and out, and checking the porch together to see if we saw any traces of anything, but all was clear. My question to you is, has anyone here experienced anything like this? Not at all sleep paralysis, but noticeable whispers or knocking. If so, do you have any suggestions to what I can do? I will say it's entirely plausible this could have been a person, but I didn't hear any footsteps on the porch or at my bedside window, which can be hard to cover up unless someone was trying to be exceptionally sneaky. When I started my first year of grad school, I moved into a basement suite in an old Victorian house on the edge of town. The landlady was a kind woman in her 70s, soft-spoken and a bit eccentric, but always respectful. She lived alone in the main house upstairs. The rent was cheap, and I was only a 10-minute bike ride from campus. It seemed like the perfect arrangement. But from the moment I moved in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with the place. The basement had been converted into a separate living unit long ago, and though it was furnished decently and had its own entrance, the entire floor always felt damp and too still, like it was holding its breath. The air was heavy, and certain corners stayed unnaturally dark no matter how many lamps I brought in. There were no windows, only narrow grates along the ceiling that were high and impossible to see through. The only connection between the main house and the basement was a locked stairwell behind a heavy door in the laundry room. The landlady told me never to unlock it unless she knocked first and called down. That was the rule. About 2 weeks in, I was woken up by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. The lights were off, and the room was soaked in pitch darkness. I looked at the clock. It read 2:15 a.m. Expecting to hear the upstairs door open and her voice call my name, I listened. But there was no knock and no call. Just these steps descending the wooden stairs, and the way they were walking, it was like someone was unfamiliar with how loud they were being, or maybe they just didn't care. I waited for the sound of keys or the door handle to turn, but nothing came. Just the footsteps and then silence. And then the floorboards just outside my bedroom creaked. At first it was just a groan, then two. Then a shift like a weight being adjusted. I didn't move. I could barely breathe. My door was locked. I always locked it before bed, but I suddenly didn't trust that was enough. I was too afraid to reach for my phone, so I pulled the blanket over my head like a child, heart hammering so hard it made my temples throb. Then with terrifying slowness, the doorknob began to turn. It rattled softly, once and then again. Testing, I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed my hands to my ears like I could muffle reality. I felt like a rabbit pinned under a hawk's shadow, completely helpless. Then silence. I stayed that way under the covers until dawn, and I never heard the steps go back up. When the morning sun finally crept through the high grey windows, I emerged, shivering and exhausted. The door was still locked. Nothing had been moved, but the sense of wrongness hung thick in the air. I told myself it had been a dream, it had to be, but I never slept comfortably there again. I stayed there for 2 years, always too busy or too broke to move. I stacked furniture in front of the stairwell door most nights and kept a flashlight and kitchen knife under my pillow. I learned to function on about 4 hours of shallow sleep and a few cups of bitter coffee. The night of my graduation, I booked a hotel downtown. My parents couldn't fit in the apartment anyway, and I didn't want them anywhere near that place. That night in the hotel, I slept like the dead. It was bliss. It wasn't until many years later, in fact, that I dared ask the new tenant what they thought of the place. They paused and said, "You mean the stairs?" And that's all they would say. A few years ago, my wife and I rented this 2-story house with a basement on the outskirts of town. It looked normal enough from the outside. Nothing about it screamed haunted. The neighborhood was quiet, sleepy even. But from the moment we moved in, something about the house felt wrong. It was subtle at first, almost like a shadow lurking just beyond the edges of sight. One of the first strange things we noticed was a sound we could never explain. Every single morning without fail, at exactly 8:30 a.m., heavy footsteps would echo from the second floor, slowly descending down the creaky wooden stairs into the basement. No one was ever around, no guests, no neighbors, no pets. Just these slow, deliberate footsteps descending into the depths below. We'd listen, frozen in place, wondering who or what was walking those stairs. It didn't take long before we started exploring the basement more thoroughly, desperate for answers. That's when we found it. A hidden room. The door was old, almost invisible behind some hanging sheets of plywood, like it had been deliberately concealed. When we pushed it open for the first time, the air inside was cold and thick. I remember my wife's phone suddenly cracking to life in her hand, and static blasted from the speakers at an ear-piercing volume with no apparent source, then cutting off as suddenly as it had started. We exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. The night before our wedding, a close friend of mine came over to hang out. We smoked some spice, synthetic weed or so we thought. That stuff was a nightmare. I'm lucky to be alive. But he started telling me about a ghost that had been following him around the house, whispering for him to leave. He said it left scratch marks on his arm, deep gouges, and I laughed it off at first, chalking it up to the paranoia or the weed. But then things got serious. Later that same night around midnight, we heard a sharp knock on the balcony on the second floor. Both of us froze, hearts pounding, and we crept upstairs and looked out into the darkness. There, pacing slowly, was a figure, human shape but not human. It felt like a faint shimmer of electric energy wrapped in a barely visible form, like one of those plasma lighting globe toys you can buy at Spencer's, but far scarier. It pulsed and flickered, shifting in and out of focus. We couldn't see any face, no features, but it moved with eerie purpose. I want to be absolutely clear about this. It wasn't just me hallucinating or seeing things. My friend saw it too. We were standing side by side, staring at the same apparition at the same time, and neither of us blinked. Neither of us doubted what we were seeing. Then, to our complete disbelief, it spoke, not with words, but with a chilling presence. It wanted to come inside. Against every instinct and all common sense, probably because we were still under the haze of that terrible spice, and we said yes. We watched as it crossed the threshold, gliding into the living room and settling down on the couch, almost like it was waiting for us. We flicked on a movie, hoping it might somehow distract us from the creeping terror building inside, but we couldn't look away. Every few minutes, one of us would glance over and see it sitting there, faintly glowing and swaying. We looked at each other silently, asking if we saw it too. We began to test it, moving around the room, watching it as it followed or shifted its position exactly where we expected. At one point, I walked behind it and the air grew icy cold. It didn't flicker or vanish. It was real. And we both touched the armrest where it sat. No warmth. It was strange. We both knew we were losing our grip on reality, but somehow the shared experience kept us tethered. If it had been a hallucination, why were we able to point out its exact location independently and agree perfectly every time? Why could we both see it clearly and unmistakably? Hours passed in that silence. Finally, as exhaustion took over and fell asleep, the figure slowly faded away, disappearing like mist in morning sun. After that night, the footsteps upstairs stopped. The hidden room door remained closed and untouched, but the memory of that shadowy visitor remained. We moved out soon after anyway, and never went back. But I do wonder what the hell that was. About 4 years ago, I used to travel for work all over the province. Occasionally I would work in the surrounding towns of where I grew up. I would stay in a house where my step-grandparents used to live, but my brother owns it now after they both passed away. A lot of their stuff is still there, furniture and other belongings. My brother was barely ever there, so he didn't mind me staying there while I worked. And as it was free lodging, I figured why not. Now, my step-grandfather was not a good man. In fact, the reason I moved away was because there was a court case where he pled guilty for child molestation, and I was placed in foster care and moved to a new city. So I felt uncomfortable being in that house in the first place. But he was gone, and I was older now, so I gave it a try. The first day in the house, I took a tour. I closed my brother's bedroom door, and same with my nephew's, and set up camp in the living room. Then I went into the basement to turn on the water and heat. When I went down there, I snooped around a little, just a bunch of boxes and their old stuff. Nothing caught my eye. I headed back upstairs, closed the basement door, ate supper, and went to work. When I came back around 7 hours later, the bedroom door and basement door were open. That was odd. I told myself it must have been me and I forgot or something. I tried to rationalize it. I carried on with work, then settled in to watch a movie before bed. I tried to rationalize it. Made myself some food, did a bit more work, then settled in to watch a movie before I went to sleep. As I was lying, I felt like I was being watched. I got up and put sheets over the deer heads my brother had on the walls, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I didn't sleep much that night, but I didn't hear or see anything. The next morning I closed the door again and locked the basement door. The basement had a lock on the outside, as if someone was in the basement and they couldn't get out. I went to work. 9 hours or so later I came back, and all the doors were open again. Weird. I knew I had closed them this time. I went and wandered the house again, looking in all the rooms and braving the basement again. I didn't see anything weird, but I had a bad feeling in the basement. I went back and tried to relax. That night I heard some noise in the basement but wasn't brave enough to go down at night. The next day I had a plan. I tied the 2-bedroom doors shut, as they were in a corner, so I tied them together so neither could open. I locked the basement door and put a few cases of beer my brother had in front of the basement door and went to work. After work I returned. The beer bottles were moved to the side and the basement door was open. Again I looked at the rope. It was untied and the bedroom doors were open. I was freaked out and drove the 3 hours back to my home city. I was telling some friends about how the house just didn't feel right, and I was worried my step-grandfather's spirit or something was still there. One friend was intrigued, and one thought I was messing with them. The next day, we packed up a Ouija board, candles, sage, and a few other bits. I brought those 2 friends, one skeptic and one believer. We drove the 3 hours there. I gave them both a tour of the house, and we set up camp in the living room. After we got the board ready, we started, and we find that there's a spirit attached to an object in the basement. Now, I've seen my fair bit of horror movies, and know we shouldn't go into the basement with a Ouija board and listen to a spirit. Well, we did just that. The skeptic thought we were just messing with him at this point. We head to the basement, set up the board on top of a pool table, and once we started it back up, a weird smell like fermenting sewage filled the basement for a few seconds. All 3 of us could smell it. Now, in the basement there were 2 pink walls and 2 green walls. We asked the board if the object was closer to a pink or green wall. The board said pink. I looked to my right, and right there, staring at us, was a vintage pink stuffed bear. None of us had noticed it when I gave the tour. I hadn't seen it any time I went there. In fact, I'd never seen it before in my life. We asked if it was the bear, and the planchette moved to yes. At this point, the skeptic started to come around. We asked what it wanted, and it said, home. So what did I do? I walked over to this creepy stuffed bear, picked it up, and we headed back upstairs. We proceeded to ask some questions. It revealed that its name was Sarah, and that she was 12. I proceeded to bring the bear home, asking pendulum questions on the 3-hour drive. I put the bear in my garage. I set her atop of the board on a table and headed back inside for the night. The next day, I went out to the garage to check and grab my board to bring it back inside, knowing I wouldn't want the bear inside the house if I didn't know she was going to be safe. When I walked in, the Ouija board was on the ground out of the box, and she was sitting on the table. The thing is, I had placed her on top of the box, and yet she was sitting on the board, which was on the ground. Weird, right? Years have gone by. I have moved twice and no longer have the garage. For the first 6 months or so in the garage, things would move and go missing. When she first entered the house, my dog wouldn't enter the room she was in. I kept her in my craft room away from the public area. My dog would just sit and stare at the doorway. Finally, I just went up to the bear and said, if you'd like to stay in the house, I need you to stop freaking out my dog and get along and behave. And the next day, my dog entered the room with no issues. I now live on my own, and the bear is in my spare room. She's well behaved and nothing has happened in the year I've lived here. I still think she's here though, but I have yet to find someone brave enough to talk with her again. When my aunt was about 15, she stayed home alone during the day while her grandparents and brother went into town to buy groceries. She spent her time on the phone speaking to her boyfriend. She said she heard a vehicle drive up, and a minute later someone knocked on the door. She told her boyfriend that she had to let him go because she thought her grandparents were back from the store. She said it sounded like they were kicking the door with security boots on. So she looked out the window and saw no cars. So she decided to call her cousin Clara, who lived in the next town. Clara always carried a shotgun with her. My aunt also called her boyfriend back to tell him what was going on. Clara showed up, and a minute later my aunt's boyfriend and his sister arrived, armed and ready. Clara checked the door, and lo and behold, the screen door was locked. There was no way the doorknob to the heavy wooden door could have been messed with. They decided to check the back of the house. In the backyard there was a basement entrance with an old wooden door that had been sealed shut with heavy chains for years. No one had ever been inside to my knowledge. There was a rumor in the family that money had been hidden in the basement long ago, but no one knew exactly where. Some believed it was tucked away in the walls or buried beneath the floor. Others thought that there was an underground tunnel connecting the basement to both the old burned-down house down the street and the shed, though no one had ever found proof. My aunt and Clara walked down the steps to make sure the door was still locked, and as they were making their way back up, they both felt a gust of cold air pushing past them, rushing down. Suddenly, the basement door, still bound with thick chains, began vibrating horribly, as if something inside was trying to break free. The chains rattled violently. There was an old shed on the property, and at night my aunt said she could see someone inside with a flashlight just looking around. Down the road stood the remains of an old burnt-down house. You had to pass that house to get to my family's home. Supposedly it had been a residence for migrant workers and their families. Everyone inside had perished in a fire, including children. Whenever my aunt's father passed by that house, he would see a red ball bouncing outside of it. Sometimes my grandmother, Grandma Teresa, would hear the screams of women and children and would call the sheriff, but the sheriff never took her seriously, thinking she was making up the stories. My aunt said that many times they would see what appeared to be the old house engulfed in flames. My uncle and grandfather would rush over to put out the house, only to find no fire, no smoke, just an eerie silence. The illusion of the house burning happened often. She said she hated the nights because it would get unbearably hot, with only a single window near the front or back door for cooling. At night she could hear children playing, pulling a wagon and laughing. It happened frequently. She would cry and beg her parents to let her sleep in their room, and her grandmother would make a little bed on the floor next to theirs. It was terrifying because she could hear the children, but there were no streetlights. It was just complete darkness. The ghostly voices would chant, "Come out and play, we want to play with you." And she still shudders when she shares that story. I don't know exactly what happened to that house, or if my family still owns the land. Many people have told me that all the hauntings were because my great-grandmother, Abuela Rosa, was a witch who practiced brujeria. An older family member once told me that Rosa despised my great-grandfather and had prepared a special glass of water for him. He didn't drink it, but her own son did, and he became gravely ill. They claimed our family was cursed. I kind of believe it, especially since all the women in my family have lost their first husband, except for mine. Wherever Rosa lived, hauntings followed. Years later, she moved to another town with my cousin Clara, and even more scary things happened in that house. My family, including myself, seemed to attract the dead, which is both a blessing and a curse. Rosa always said that wherever she was taking clothes off the clothesline, she would hear someone whisper her name. And no, they never found the money. They looked hard, digging. Once they finally managed to break open the basement door, stepping inside, the air was thick and heavy. They dug through the dirt floor, pushing aside rotting wooden beams and stone slabs, searching desperately for any sign of a hidden treasure. The deeper we dug, the more uneasy they felt, like they were disturbing something that had been left alone for too long. Then, out of nowhere, a chilling whisper filled the space saying, "Rosita, don't." That was enough. They ran out of there as fast as they could, leaving the basement wide open. Whatever was down there didn't want us finding the money. I've always believed in ghosts, to an extent anyway. I was raised Christian, and now I'd say I'm more spiritual than religious. But that sense of there being something more never quite left me. I don't fear the idea of spirits. I think they exist and think sometimes they try and get our attention. But I don't invite anything in intentionally, like I don't touch Ouija boards or do rituals or anything else. I just live my life and figure that if something around me is there, it's probably not there to hurt me. So I don't get freaked out by the usual ghost stuff like lights flickering, cupboard doors opening. Even if it's something weird, I just tend to shrug and move on. But something did happen that I can't explain, and I want to get your thoughts on it. So it was the middle of the night, no idea what time exactly, but I was asleep in bed. I'm deaf, by the way, and I didn't have my hearing aids in, so everything around me was completely silent. I am profoundly hard of hearing, and once those aids are around, I only pick out the loudest, deepest sounds, like thunder crackling right outside the house. Nothing subtle, nothing soft. So anyway, I'm sound asleep when I feel someone grab my arm. Not a little nudge or brush. This was a full-on yank, like someone was urgently trying to get me up. And they nearly did. I half sat up, heart pounding, fully expecting one of my parents to be standing over me, waking me up for an emergency. But there was no one there. Just me. No footsteps retreating, no shadows, no whispers. Just the room exactly as it should be. The funny thing is, though, I wasn't even scared. I mean, yeah, I was alarmed at first, but only because I thought something had happened to my parents. Once I realized they were fine and no one else was in the room, I was almost relieved. Confused, yes, but mostly relieved. After that, I started thinking about how most ghost stories tend to start with sounds, footsteps, knockings, whispering, slamming doors, and it hit me. I wouldn't notice any of that, not without my hearing aids in, and I never wear them to sleep. So now I'm wondering, what if it's been here the whole time? What if the spirit or ghost or whatever it is has been knocking things over or been tapping on the walls or opening closet doors and bathrooms for months trying to get my attention, and I just haven't heard it because I can't? Maybe the yank on my arm was the moment it figured it out. Honestly, if that's what happened, if I've got a ghost who's had to adapt to how they haunt, it almost feels sweet. There was this house my brother and I shared once. Relatively new build, but nothing old or creepy looking on the outside. But something about it always felt off. We were convinced it was haunted, though there was no obvious reason why. One weekend, my brother had gone away on a work trip. It was late, well past midnight on a Saturday, and I was alone with our two big Labrador retrievers who were usually calm, but that night seemed restless, pacing and growling at shadows. Suddenly, from somewhere below the house, the garage or basement area, I heard a loud, angry banging. Not just one or two knocks, but rapid, heavy slams, like someone was pounding on a door with anger and frustration. Here's the thing. The garage had this strange, swinging door that didn't have a doorknob, just a wooden panel hanging on hinges. You could push it open easily, no lock, no handle, so banging on the door seemed pointless. If anyone was there, they could have just pushed it to open. The only other door down there was an access panel to a sealed crawl space, a narrow, dark cavity under the house with no lock. It was the only other way in or out of that creepy crawl space. So the dogs were losing their minds, barking furiously, growling, ears perked, hackles raised. They refused to go down and investigate, and it was like they knew something was wrong. I stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding, trying to figure out what was more likely. Some stranger banging on that swinging garage door for no reason, or something coming from the sealed crawl space. I called the dogs, tried to coax them down. They wouldn't budge. It felt like the knocking wasn't just random noise at this point, it felt deliberate, like they were trying to get my attention, trying to draw me there. Panic started rising in my chest. I thought if something bad was going to happen, I'd rather be in my bed, as my room was upstairs and the dogs were with me. Surely if someone was breaking in or worse, they'd have to go through the dogs first, and these dogs weren't just pets, they were protectors. So shaking, I decided to go to bed. I told myself it was probably just some drunk person messing around or maybe a raccoon. But honestly, deep down, I wasn't convinced. A week later, my brother came home. We were both asleep when at around 2 a.m. on Saturday, he barged into my room pale and wide-eyed. He'd heard the knocking too. The dogs were again barking like crazy, so he ran down to check. But of course the knocking stopped the moment we got near the door. We searched everywhere, the garage, the basement, the crawl space, but found nothing. No footprints, no sign of forced entry, no hiding person. The thing is, we never figured out what caused the banging. For years, the mystery haunted us almost as much as the sound itself. Then 8 years later, I ran into an old neighbor and jokingly mentioned the ghostly knocking at the house. That's when he dropped the bombshell. There had been a burglary ring operating in the neighborhood back then. The crooks had a creepy method. They'd knock on doors late at night to see if anyone was home, and if no one answered or called the cops, they'd know it was safe to break in later. But if someone responded, or the dogs went wild, they'd move on. Apparently our house was on their list. They knocked, and when the dogs barked non-stop, they didn't break in, at least, not that night. What still puzzles me is why they knocked again a week later, knowing the dogs were there. Were they testing our reactions? Or was something else going on? Or maybe the dogs sensed more than burglars. Either way, the banging wasn't paranormal, but the fear it sparked felt very real. And it's a mystery I don't think I'll ever forget. This happened in the basement of my childhood home when I was around 13. The house didn't feel particularly haunted, but both of my two siblings can attest. Weird stuff used to happen in that basement. I was having a sleepover with a friend, and whenever we stayed at my house, we always slept down there. The basement was fully finished with a big TV. Pool table, couch, Murphy bed, the works. So it was great because us rowdy teenagers could hang out down there and not disturb my parents much. We fell asleep watching a movie on a DVD, and at some point I recall waking up to the bright yellow selection screen glaring in the dark, and the same annoying ass sound clip replaying over and over, just a few decibels too loud. Now it's important to note, to the left of the TV was a tall, skinny closet with a door. I remember we had gone into that closet to grab some extra blankets before starting the movie, and perhaps we didn't close it all the way, and because when I woke up the door was slightly ajar. So I woke up, and I'm in that weird, surreal state where I can't really tell if I'm awake yet or still asleep, just dreaming. But I look at the TV, and I'm suddenly frozen with fear. Right in front of the TV on the left-hand side was this tall, skinny black shadow obstructing the bright yellow color of the screen. It didn't have any particular features, more just a dark, vaguely shaped mist of a standing figure. Suddenly, almost as if the shadow noticed me looking at it, the mist quickly drifts into the closet next to the TV, and I swear, the door closes behind it. At this point, I'm so scared I can't move. I want to wake up my friend so badly, but I couldn't even bring myself to speak. I just sat there hoping I was seeing things and/or trying to convince myself that I was still asleep, and it was in fact just a dream. All of a sudden, my friend, whom I thought was asleep this entire time, sits straight up next to me on the couch and goes, "Jet, did you see that?" We sprinted up those goddamn stairs so fast our feet barely touched the ground. I don't think I've ever run like that in my entire life. We told my parents the next morning and they just laughed at us, clearly not believing it. But when I told my siblings the same story, they both just shrugged. Each responded similarly with something along the lines of, "Weird stuff only happens down in the basement." In December 2020, my husband and I had a burst pipe in the basement of our nearly 100-year-old home. My husband was working on getting water out of the basement, and he had me stay upstairs as we only had one pair of waterproof boots, and we had a very anxious dog. He had been down there for a while, and I knew he would eventually have to go to the hardware store. But while I was listening for him to leave, I was reading while cuddling our dog. After an hour or so, I heard my husband calling my name and the sound of wet boots on the hardwood floor. So it sounded like, "Sarah, yeah?" Followed by about 3 to 5 seconds of silence. "Sarah, where are you?" "I'm in the bedroom, right where you left me." I hear the footsteps coming down the hallway, then stop in front of our door. At this point, my very large dog got up and stood over me and growled in a way I'd never heard him do before. His fur was on the end and he stared intently at the door. "Where are you?" Before I could respond, the doorknob began to twist and twist. The doorknob kept turning but never opened. The dog at this point was going absolutely crazy, growling, and now has himself between me and the door. Just as I thought the door was going to open, the dog barked, and the door stopped. There was no noise or retreat of voices, all was quiet. And after about a minute, I got a text. It was my husband, texting me and asking me if I needed anything while he was out. When I checked his location, he was over 35 minutes away at the hardware store. I freaked the hell out, pushed the dresser in front of the door, and checked all of our exterior cameras, and no one had come in or out, other than when my husband left. I still don't know what it was. I've gotten mixed reviews of mimics or just passing spirits, But what do you all think? And it's never happened since, or again. Back in 2018, we bought a 1928 duplex, super quaint and cute, right off the bat. The house felt different than all the others we had seen. During settlement, the previous owner said, "If you take care of the house will take care of you." While my father and brother proceeded to junk up the house, food left out, things all over the place, soda cans on the ground. This was very abnormal behavior, but my father was recently divorced and in depression, to his defense. We started to notice strange things around the house. A mixing spoon popped up out of a very deep bowl and landed in the middle of a kitchen floor. A shadow figure would be seen going through the house. One particular day, my brother called me freaking out. He said soda cans were rolling across the floor violently on their own, and he saw an old man sitting in the chair on the back porch. He even called the police. A week later, my father saw an old man standing in the sunroom dressed in sweatpants and a grey shirt. As my father's depression got better, and I continued maintaining the home while he no longer junked it up, things calmed down. The house was clean. The house was calm. Only when we started painting did my grandmother see a shadow figure walk from my brother's room and through the banister of the steps. Then about 6 months later, our neighbor's demon child tried kicking in the front door because he claimed my brother had something of his. These kids were around 10 at the time, so my brother caved and let him in because he was terrified he would be hurt if he didn't. The neighbor kid searched all over the home for this specific item, and finally he went into the basement and came flying up the stairs yelling about an angry old man down there. He refused to ever even come up to our porch, even 3 years after, until he moved. One day, my father spoke with the previous owner and shared similar experiences. After talking to the neighbors and doing some property history lookup, we discovered that in the 1990s, an 86-year-old man named John died on the back porch after spilling something in the basement and opening the rear basement door for ventilation. John is who we had been seeing. We realized that John is a very friendly presence, and to this day, we still experience activity. I was on the phone with a friend when we saw a grey mass go from my closet over to the other wall and told my friend what had happened. I have since bought my own home and moved. My new home felt different, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it until I realized that my home lacks that energy. My dad's home itself feels like it's alive, as if the home itself is its own being. We would even jokingly sign John's name on cards. Whenever I stopped by, I always yell, "Hey John." John's cool. I miss him. My current home is the only non-haunted home I've ever lived in, and I dislike it. I've lived in other homes aside from John's house that had some very negative energy, which is a whole nother story. But John's a really cool dude. We need more Johns in this world. Or the next, depending on your point of view. The following began around 2015, when we were living in a house in Cape Girardeau. The layout was simple: 2 bedrooms and a bathroom on the left, front room, kitchen, and dining room on the right, and of course, a basement. When my youngest brother was expected, my older brother and I were moved into the basement. I've always had an uneasy feeling about that space. Not long after we moved down there, I began having recurring dreams. In them, I'd be going about my day in the basement, when I'd suddenly start floating, and then be violently flung into a wall or the floor. Right before impact, I'd wake up, and it kept happening, and I never saw what caused it. Around the same time, I started hearing someone call my name. I checked with my parents, but they never called. When we moved into our current home, my stepdad installed cameras around the house. One day, we were watching the feed from my bedroom that my youngest brother and I shared. The camera was aimed at our bunk bed when we saw a shadow, shaped like a quadruped, crawl from the top bunk and vanish before hopping off the stairs. My stepdad saw it too and told me to ignore it. He once mentioned he has a spirit attached to him that feeds off negative energy. About a year ago, my brothers and I were eating at the table while our parents were in the front room, when we suddenly heard a strange noise, like someone gagging and trying to talk, coming from our parents' room. It wasn't either of our dogs, and my stepdad told us to ignore it. Just last month, I was lying in bed half asleep when I heard a soft, gentle man's voice say, "Here." I opened my eyes, looked around groggily, and saw no one. There couldn't have been anyone else around, since the other side of the wall is just a sealed storage area. A few weeks later, something similar happened. I was more awake that time, and although I forgot what the voice said, it shook me fully awake, and I looked around in confusion to see nothing. A few days ago, I had a dream where Michael Jackson leaned over me and handed me something. I woke up just as I took it. I told my mum, but she didn't know what to make of it. Today at around 2:15 p.m., I walked into our bedroom and noticed it was much colder than the rest of the house, even though it was warm outside. I stepped into the hall, warm, back into the room, cold. About an hour later, it had warmed back up. Around the same time, a small air freshener can fell into the washer. It had been sitting on a shelf above the dryer. The way it landed didn't make sense. It shouldn't have fallen to the floor. Every now and then I still hear someone call my name, but no one ever did. And I'm starting to think we have a ghost, one that doesn't mean any harm, but that doesn't want to be forgotten. This happened recently, and I still can't wrap my head around it. It wasn't a dream, a prank, or a kind of illusion. Multiple people witnessed it, both inside and outside the door, and to this day none of us can explain it. So here's what happened. A group of people I know went into a creepy basement. The basement door was open when they entered and the lights were on. But once they were inside, they found themselves completely locked in and couldn't get the door open from their side no matter what. Me and a friend were upstairs. We heard them call out that they were stuck and couldn't get out. We figured the door had just jammed, so we went over to help. And here's when things get weird. As we approached the basement door, the group inside later told us they could hear us coming. They were standing about a meter from the door facing it, waiting for us to open it. I pushed on the door and it didn't budge at first, so I shoulder checked it to get it open. It made a loud thud, not a subtle sound, and my friend was right beside me the whole time. We opened the door slightly, maybe less than halfway, and what we saw behind the door made us both stop. Pitch black, no light at all, like a void. We both saw it and immediately felt like something was deeply wrong. There was this intense gut feeling, like you're not supposed to be looking into that. Like we were staring into something we weren't meant to see. We freaked out and ran. I'm not exaggerating, we literally ran away from the door. At the time we honestly thought, maybe they're trying to scare us, maybe this is some elaborate prank. But after we talked to them later, we realized they weren't messing with us at all. And here's the part that really scares me. The people inside said the lights were on the entire time. They were staring at the door as we opened it, but they said they never saw it move. No change in lighting, no shift. They did, however, hear us approach and hear us running away after we saw what was behind it. We still talk about it sometimes. It wasn't just creepy. It felt like we had witnessed something we weren't supposed to, like a glitch or a thin spot in reality. If you've ever experienced something like this, where sound, sight, and physical space don't line up, I'd love to hear it, because this still haunts the hell out of me. Back when I was younger, I would sleep in my mum's room, which was our fully finished basement. It was a large one side having a small lounge-like area including a couch, coffee table and TV, and the other side was her bed and a small bathroom. The basement led to the laundry room. It was a concrete room with the washer and dryer and a storage space as big as a room around the corner. My mum had placed a full metal clothing rack right by the doorway. It had no door, so you could always see into it, which is important for later. I would see these shadowy figures, 3 to be exact. They each had something defining about them. They all looked humanish, but just shadowed. I remembered the one I would sometimes see in my own room, and was always waving, and he was taller than the other 2, bulkier almost. The second one had inhuman legs. It looked like he had really baggy pants on or something like that, and it would always be staring at me. The last one was smaller and skinnier, and would always be hiding in the laundry rack by the door. I was always told this was a recurring nightmare or sleep paralysis, and I believed that for a while. But I have aphantasia, which causes me not to dream at all. So what was it? You might think it was sleep paralysis, but that was disproven when one night I tried to sit up, because I couldn't with the shadows watching me. And it worked. This was particularly odd because during sleep paralysis, you're supposed to be unable to move. And I could do just that. And it's not something I made up, because my mum asked me about it next morning. I don't know what to make of all of this, but I know deep down they were real. And after we moved, I never saw them again. I had lived in this apartment for a total of 3 years. For the first year and a half, I lived there with my ex-husband. My best friend found the apartment for me. Her sister was breaking her lease and was looking for someone to take it over, and I was desperate to move out of my husband's mum house and for us to finally have our own space. And so we decided to take on the lease. We divorced about 1.5 years after moving in. While my ex lived there, nothing much happened except for one thing neither of us could explain. For context, the layout of the apartment was as follows. It was on the 2nd floor, and as soon as you walked into the apartment, on your right was the kitchen, which was open to the living room. As you walked past the living room, you'd enter a long hallway, and on the left wall of the hallway there were 3 doors, 2 leading to 2 bedrooms, and the last door was on the left, a bathroom. At the very end of the hallway was a final door that led to the laundry room. My ex had a gaming computer situated in the living room, and I used the spare bedroom as an art studio and had my own little desk in there with a laptop to watch YouTube while working on projects. My ex taught me proper computer etiquette, so I always made sure to shut my computer down and didn't just leave it on constantly. My ex had 2 cats, and anyone who had a cat knows they love to jump up on surfaces and cause trouble. And so to avoid this, I always kept my studio closed when I wasn't in there. One night I remember waking to what sounded like my ex's gaming computer playing some sort of video. I assumed maybe one of the cats had jumped onto his modem and accidentally turned it on. In and out of grogginess, I brushed it off and just drifted back to sleep. However, upon my ex having woken up early for work in the morning, I realized it had been my laptop that had been turned on, because I realized he was going into my studio to turn it off. I immediately felt a ping of anxiety shoot through my chest, because I really had no idea how the computer could possibly be on, and on top of that playing a YouTube video. First of all, you needed to enter a password for the computer, and I know for a fact that I had shut it down, as I always do. Finally, my aunt's studio door had been closed for a few hours before we headed off to bed. If I had by chance left my laptop on, loudly playing YouTube videos, we would have heard it before drifting off to sleep, and subsequently would have turned it off. So neither of us could really explain that, and it was just pretty strange. But nothing really happened after that, so we just kind of forgot about it and thought maybe my computer was somehow acting up. However, once we got divorced and my ex moved out, this is when things really started to get crazy. My ex took his cat with him, and so it was just me and my dog in the apartment. My dog has always slept in the bedroom with me. She has never slept out in the living room through the night, and I always got the creepy feeling that I was being watched. I never felt 100% at ease while living there alone. I've never smoked cigarettes, and my friend's sister hasn't smoked cigarettes there either, and the smell of stale old cigarettes would always come and go randomly. Normally I would smell it in the laundry room, but sometimes I'd smell it as soon as I'd walk in the door or hallway. I could never explain where the smell was coming from. The hallway in the apartment always felt incredibly creepy. My friend told me that every time she came over there while her sister had lived there, the hallway always gave her the creeps too. But her sister had lived there for 10 years and swear she'd never experienced anything there. 6 months after the divorce, I began dating my current boyfriend. Sometimes he would spend a few nights over at the apartment with me, because quite frankly, I didn't like being there alone, and he didn't like the idea of me being there alone. Things had been happening that honestly had me wondering if someone was secretly living there. I lived in a really bad area where there are a lot of homeless people around, so maybe one had snuck in. I didn't really have any other explanation. I'd hear things rattling around the kitchen at night while laying in bed. The most terrifying thing happened while I was alone in bed. I have a Great Dane, and she sleeps on her own futon bed, which sat at the foot of my bed. She's super laid back, and when she's asleep, she's out. Nothing waking her, especially in the middle of the night while we're both asleep. Well, on this specific night, I woke up to her growling at something. She never does this just randomly in the middle of the night. It was around 2 a.m. She was looking directly into the hallway and she was super alert, sitting up and baring her teeth. I've literally never seen her do that before. That alone scared me, so I shushed her so I could try and listen. And when she was quiet, I heard the creaking and shuffling of footsteps coming down the hallway from the living room towards my door. I was absolutely shaken with fear. I was fully believing that someone was in my apartment. My heart was pounding out my chest. I was so terrified I slowly climbed out of bed and grabbed my pistol, which was underneath it. I listened a little more and heard footsteps proceeding closer, and my dog continued growling. I walked towards my doorway, which was open, and I hate to say that I was fully expecting to see someone in the hallway. The person who I suspected had been living in my apartment secretly for months. But as I turned around, in my doorway there was absolutely nothing. I was relieved for a minute, but then it hit me to check the rest of the apartment. I did that, and after finding nothing, I made sure all of the windows and front door was locked, which they were. I think it goes without saying I had a lot of trouble sleeping for the rest of the night. My boyfriend didn't experience anything nearly as much as I did, but he believed me and had some experiences of his own. Randomly waking up in absolute panic in the middle of the night for no reason, with a feeling of absolute dread, like someone is in the room with you. It all came full circle when one night I heard what sounded like the silverware drawer opening suddenly and slamming shut while in bed with my boyfriend. I didn't even get up to check and see what it was. At this point, We were really just trying to ignore everything. However, that morning I was going down to the first floor to get my mail. I lived above a restaurant, and I was friendly with the owner, but we never really spoke much. I happened to run into him and we started small talk, and I told him I was moving, and he was like, "Really? Wow." And then he asked if I had ever experienced anything while living there. At first I thought he meant just with people in the alley harassing me, and I said, "Well, sure, people go through my trash sometimes." And he stopped me and said, "No, I mean things you can't explain in the apartment." My face went white, and I told him, as a matter of fact, yes, and asked why he was wondering. He told me he had customers and employees who had experienced things, and they had seen apparitions in the restaurant. He said he had experienced things like cans of food flying off the shelves, and just the really heavy, eerie feeling of being watched. He also told me that apparently the tenant who had previously lived in that apartment, which was in the same building as mine in the front, had mentioned to him that he used a Ouija board in his apartment once. The owner of the restaurant had a self-proclaimed medium come to do a reading of the building. She said she felt energy vortexes in the basement. To be honest, hearing all of that was a lot, because I had spent so long just trying to shrug everything off that had been happening and just ignore it all. But hearing all of this made me realize perhaps it wasn't all in my head. The last thing I remember experiencing was one night when my boyfriend and I were getting ready for bed. I was already in bed and he was brushing his teeth in the bathroom down the hall. My dog was coming into the bedroom to get on her bed, and I said "good night" to her. My boyfriend came into the bedroom and asked, "Who are you talking to?" I told him I said good night to the dog. He said he was asking because he thought I was on the phone, but because he heard good night said out loud twice. I told him I only said it once. Thankfully, we moved out shortly after. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you guys have been enjoying the daily content. I certainly have enjoyed doing it, especially trying to make these videos longer. Funnily enough, at recording time, these videos are double the length of the original length I used to do before, roughly around 40 minutes, so I hope that you guys are liking. I think I will be hitting you up tomorrow with some cabin stories, and these really are the creme de la creme. They're going to be so good, so please don't miss me on Saturday. You're going to love it. That's it from me though. Of course, it goes without saying that I would like to extend a huge thanks to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen, and for signing up they get some really cool exclusive perks, and if you'd like to find out what those are, you can follow the links in the description to find out more. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.